Since we're now into the fourth year of this pandemic, and it's really become endemic in our country anyway, I thought it would be a good idea to really review what the symptomatology of this infection actually are, both in the acute phase as well as the chronic phase. I wanted to stress that in medicine anyway, we learn early on that there are really three stages to infectious diseases. There's exposure, where you come into contact with a new germ, such as what the COVID-2 virus actually is. Secondly, then, there's entrance into the body. And so in COVID-2 or COVID infection, that happens when we breathe in air that contains tiny little microscopic, submicroscopic viral particles. And that really is essentially when infection occurs. And with regard to COVID-2, because of the virtue of the spike protein on the cell surface, it binds to receptors that are pretty widely spread, distributed in tissues of our body, in particular in the lungs and in the heart and in the kidneys. So that's what infection is. So we have exposure, and we have infection, and then we have disease, which follows the exposure and the infection. Now the disease is what we recognize as the fact that we've got a problem. And most infectious diseases, in fact, most if not all infectious diseases, the symptoms of the infection are not caused by the germ itself, the microbe, the microorganism, just the mere presence, or products, toxins, for example, that the bugs might be releasing. Rather, it's not caused by the presence of the microbe. It's really caused by the body's immune inflammatory reaction to the presence of that foreign microbe or germ in our bodies. Therefore, it's really produced by us, the symptoms. They're not produced by the bug. And since the early 1980s, we've become aware that there are various molecules that the immune system makes when it confronts any kind of a foreign material, be it an allergen such as ragweed pollen, which is not a microbe, it's not a living organism, or and that gives us symptoms that we recognize as allergy. But we also are having just about the same kinds of symptoms because they're due to inflammation. These symptoms are really caused by interleukins. Since the early 80s, we've accumulated more and more knowledge about these molecules. They're small messenger molecules that the immune system makes that communicates what's going on in regards to what's going on in the body. And these interleukins, now we know that there's more than 40 of them. We're probably done discovering new interleukins, but right now there's 43 or 44 interleukin molecules. The symptoms of inflammation, when a site on the body or the whole body becomes red, hot, swollen, and sore, painful, that's inflammation. That's what's been described as inflammation since the 19th century. So the question is, how does that happen? And how that happens is that the body recognizes the presence of the germ by virtue of molecules, receptor molecules that are on the surface of the immune cells. And it wasn't until 1998 that Bruce Beutler described the receptor on the surface of immune cells, lymphocytes as well as macrophages and so forth, that recognizes and senses the presence of bacterial products. And in this particular instance, the bacterial product was called endotoxin, which is a misnomer because the endotoxin wasn't endogenous to the bug. The endotoxin was endogenous to the body. The immune system itself makes the toxins. And Bruce Beutler discovered the receptor for lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, or endotoxin, which is part of the cell wall of a particular subset of bacteria. That then closed the loop because since the early 80s and even in the 70s, molecules have been discovered, interleukins. In particular, there are 3 of the 40 or more interleukins that have been described so far. There are 3 that are responsible for what we recognize as inflammation. And those 3 molecules are interleukin 1 on the one hand, interleukin 6, and tumor necrosis factor. Those 3 molecules are called proinflammatory interleukins or molecules. And what they do, they're the ones that cause the symptoms of red hot, swollen, and sore. And the way they do that is by binding onto the smallest blood vessels in our bodies. They're the ones that we call capillaries. And what that does when there's a high enough concentration of these interleukins, pro-inflammatory interleukins, it causes the cells lining the capillaries, which is only 1 cell thick, down in the tissues and in the lungs and so forth. It causes them to separate just a little bit, but it separates them enough so that the plasma from the blood starts to leak through the capillary wall into the tissues. And on a small scale, let's say you get a cut on your arm, and it over the course of the next few days becomes red hot, swollen, and sore. That's good. That can be good, although it's a little bit uncomfortable. It's effective because the plasma that leaks out of the capillaries into the tissues contains all of the wonderful molecules that immunologists study that deal with the injury and or the infection. Same kind of symptoms, red hot, swollen, and sore. And that's because of the fact that the plasma from the blood leaks out into the tissues. Now the thing is, actually Bruce Beutler got the Nobel Prize for his discovery in 1998. He got the Nobel Prize in 2011. And that essentially closed the loop because we knew that the symptoms of inflammation were not necessarily due to the lipopolysaccharide, although we didn't know how the lipopolysaccharide actually led to the symptomatology. And now, because of Beutler's discovery, we knew that. And the other thing that's important about COVID, as opposed to other kinds of infections, at least 15 to 20%, it's been reported, of patients who get acute symptoms of inflammation from the germ and the body's reaction to the germ, at least 15 to 20% of the cases, after the acute symptoms have subsided and the bug has been cleared from or eradicated from the body and cleared from the system, sometimes 15 to 20% of the cases, the inflammation persists. That's long COVID. Very similar to the so-called chronic fatigue syndrome with the brain fog, the fatigue, and other kinds of symptoms. You could have persistent cough and so forth. You can have heart abnormalities. All of those are not due to the presence of the bug because the bug's gone. Those symptoms are caused by the persistence of immunological activation. And because of the fact that the bug has been cleared, now we call it dysregulation. And because those symptoms are due to the persistence of elevated concentrations of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. So, what to do about all this? The acute symptoms of COVID have been treated. We have drugs, and in particular good drugs nowadays. We have drugs that will dampen down inflammation. For example, we have glucocorticoids, prednisone, dexamethasone, and they block the production of interleukins and cytokines, and are very, very effective, particularly on the short term. In addition, now we have monoclonal antibodies reactive to interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor, and so forth. And they have been shown to be effective in dampening the symptoms of acute COVID infection, inflammatory symptoms. However, they have not been well studied in chronic or long-term, so-called long-term COVID, and they need to be. So we still have a ways to go to deal with this, to the results of this new bug that's been released into the whole world. So it's very akin to when the initial explorers came over in the 1500s to the New World and distributed smallpox virus to all of the indigenous population, and they'd never been exposed to it before. That's exactly what's happened with COVID.